think the most surprising to come out this weekend was Meryl Streep. So she and her longtime husband, Don Gummer, they've been
45 years is not simply a number. It is school runs and red carpets, hospital waiting rooms and standing ovations, quiet Sunday mornings, and decades of shared silence that only two people who truly know each other can hold without discomfort. And when something that vast, that deeply woven into the fabric of two human beings quietly comes undone, not in a blaze of tabloid headlines or a courtroom spectacle, but in the softest and most private way imaginable, it stops you cold. It makes you wonder what really lives behind the curated smiles and the anniversary photographs that the world never stopped celebrating. What a marriage actually is when the cameras are put away, when the speeches are finished, when the decades of ordinary life press in and reveal things that public appearances can never show. Meryl Streep is not simply a famous actress. By almost every honest measure, she stands as the greatest screen performer of her generation, and the argument could be extended well beyond that. 3 Academy Awards, 21 nominations, a career so consistently extraordinary that critics eventually ran out of new language to describe it, and magazines stopped reaching for superlatives because every superlative had already been used. None of that is in dispute. But for all the mythologizing of her professional life, the story of who she is as a woman, as a wife, a mother, a grieving lover who once lost everything before she ever truly had it, has always arrived in fragments, glimpsed between the lines of careful interviews and fleeting moments of public vulnerability. That story, the real one, runs far deeper and carries far more weight than any role she has ever played on screen. Don Gummer entered Meryl Streep's life at the precise moment when life had stripped her down to almost nothing. The year was 1978, and the man she had loved with the kind of total consuming devotion that most people only ever encounter in novels had just died. John Cazale, brilliant, magnetic, criminally underrated by anyone who hadn't watched him work up close, lost his battle with lung cancer that year, and Meryl had positioned herself at his side through every brutal stage of it. She advocated fiercely for him, refused to leave, poured herself entirely into his care even as her own acting career was beginning its extraordinary ascent. Directors and producers were already watching her closely. The world had started taking notice, and she chose to spend her days in a hospital room, holding the hand of a man dying far too young, because that was where she decided to be. When he was gone, she was hollowed out in the way that only the loss of a first defining love can hollow a person out, and Don Gummer gave her somewhere to land. He offered her his apartment when she had nowhere to go, and what began as quiet human kindness evolved, faster than either of them might have anticipated, into a marriage. They wed just 6 months after John's death in September of 1978, and built a life together that the world would spend the next 4.5 decades admiring from a respectful distance. What made their marriage worth paying attention to was not its length, though 45 years stands as extraordinary in any world and borders on astonishing inside Hollywood. The architecture of how they lived was what set it apart, the way it got deliberately constructed to exist almost entirely outside the machinery of celebrity culture. In an industry that runs on visibility and treats private life as raw material for public consumption, Meryl and Don chose consistently, almost stubbornly, to remain unseen as a couple. Don did not walk red carpets alongside her. He did not grant interviews about what daily life looked like when you were married to the most acclaimed actress alive. He made his art, large-scale sculpture that earned genuine respect in serious galleries and public spaces across the country, and let her hold the spotlight entirely, without apparent resentment or any visible sense of competition. That kind of steady selflessness inside a marriage is rarer than most people realize, and rarer still when one partner's fame reaches the altitude that Meryl Streep's eventually did. Meryl, across decades of interviews, returned again and again to the same core idea, that the work mattered enormously, but that the life at home, the children, the ordinary accumulated texture of a long marriage, gave everything else its meaning and its stability. She spoke about the negotiation required to sustain a family when both partners were chasing their own creative lives. She spoke about compromise without bitterness, about the way love required a person to bend without breaking, to stay present even when the demands pulling in every other direction were enormous. A successful marriage, she once told an interviewer, required goodwill, a willingness to bend, and the wisdom to know when to stop talking, a characteristically precise and unsentimental formulation from a woman who had clearly thought hard about what made things hold rather than simply hoping they would. Their 4 children, Henry, Mamie, Grace, and Louisa, grew up largely shielded from the chaos that fame tends to generate around its recipients. All 4 went on to build distinct lives of their own, with some following their mother into performance, and the family maintained a closeness and warmth that spoke well of the environment Meryl and Don had managed to create despite the relentless demands pressing in from every direction. Those demands were real, constant, and deeply asymmetrical. Meryl was always preparing for the next role, always somewhere in the world inhabiting someone else's life for the camera, always in motion. The logistical and emotional weight of that on a marriage, on the partner holding things together at home, on the rhythms of shared daily life, is something only couples who have lived it truly understand. It requires a particular patience, a particular willingness to be the one who stays while the other one goes, and Dawn appeared to carry that patience in abundance and without complaint. The 2012 Academy Awards ceremony produced the moment that most people remember, the one that crystallized something true about who these 2 people were to each other. Standing at the Dolby Theatre podium after winning Best Actress for her portrayal of Margaret Thatcher in The Iron Lady, her 3rd Oscar, an achievement without parallel in the history of that ceremony, Meryl turned her attention to Don before she had said almost anything else. She explained to the room that she wanted to thank him before the orchestra could play him off stage because she needed him to know that everything she valued most in their life together, everything that gave her work and her world its meaning, had come from him. The words landed with an authenticity that cut through the noise of the event entirely because they were unmistakably personal and unmistakably true. And yet somewhere in the years that followed that moment, something between them had been shifting, slowly, quietly, in the way that long marriages sometimes shift, not through sudden crisis, but through gradual distance, through 2 people continuing to grow in directions that no longer fully converged. The separation, confirmed by Meryl's representative in late 2023, had apparently been underway for some time before the public learned anything about it. The couple had been living separately for years before any announcement arrived, and this detail matters beyond its value as celebrity biography because it reflects exactly who they both are at their core. No announcement was made. No narrative got managed for the press. They simply lived with the new reality, privately, with the same discretion they had applied to every other aspect of their relationship across 45 years. What the public saw during those years of quiet separation, Meryl accepting awards at international ceremonies, photographed at prestigious cultural events in Europe, giving thoughtful interviews about her latest projects, was a woman moving through her professional life with the same composure and deliberate focus she had always carried. The wedding ring stayed on her finger long after the romantic partnership had evolved into something different, which resists easy interpretation but tells you something honest about the complexity of ending something that also served at its very beginning as a form of rescue. The timing attached a particular texture to the eventual public confirmation. News of the separation broke just weeks after the couple had, in some quiet form, marked their 45th anniversary together, and that proximity, milestone and ending arriving so close, refuses to sit neatly in any single category. A marriage concluding is not automatically a marriage that failed. 45 years of shared life, of children raised together through one of the most relentlessly public careers in entertainment history, of mutual support across the most disorienting kind of sustained fame. None of that dissolves because the romantic dimension of the partnership eventually changed shape. Measured honestly, what they built together across those decades stands as a genuine accomplishment, not a cautionary tale. What has never been fully answered, and perhaps never will be, is the question of what John Cazale's memory meant to Meryl across the whole of her marriage to Don. She has spoken about John with a love that shows no sign of fading with time. In interviews given decades after his death, she described their connection in terms that suggest it permanently altered her understanding of what love is actually capable of being. He was, by her own account, unlike anyone she had known before or would come to know afterward, intellectually serious, intensely committed to the truth of his craft, quietly magnetic in a way that had nothing to do with conventional Hollywood appeal. John Cazale died at 42, having completed only 5 films in his entire career, and every single one of those films received a Best Picture nomination at the Academy Awards. That fact carries its own staggering weight. His absence from cinema history represents a genuine loss to the art form itself, and his absence from Meryl's daily life settled into something more permanent and more intimate than any professional calculation could account for. Don Gummer knew all of this when he married her. He stepped into a life that still carried the shape of someone else, and he built something real and lasting inside that complicated space. Whether John's memory ever quietly created distance inside the marriage, whether grief carried across decades can reshape a relationship without either person fully understanding how it is happening, are questions that belong entirely to Meryl and that she has never directly addressed. But they exist around the story of her marriage in a way that makes the whole thing feel more human, more difficult, and more worthy of genuine attention than any surface-level account of a celebrity split can ever capture. Both Meryl and Don moved through the end of their marriage with the same quiet maturity they brought to its duration, and that consistency tells you something. No public conflict surfaced, no bitterness found its way into any statement or interview. What their representatives communicated when the news finally reached the public was simple and carried real dignity, that their care and respect for each other had stayed fully intact, that the conclusion of a romantic partnership had not erased the decades of genuine connection preceding it. This outcome is not always available to people who have spent that much time together, who have accumulated that much shared history and that many mutual obligations. The fact that it appears genuinely true in their case reflects the quality of what they originally built, even when that thing could not hold its original form across every decade that followed. Meryl continues working at a pace and standard that most performers half her age would find difficult to sustain. Her work on Only Murders in the Building demonstrated with characteristic precision that her instincts remain as sharp as they have ever been, that her capacity to locate the specific and irreducible humanity in any character she inhabits has not softened with time, but deepened into something even more assured and more economical. She arrived at this point in her life doing exactly what she has always done, showing up completely for the work, bringing every instrument she possesses to each new role, and letting the results carry the argument on their own. Don remains focused on his sculpture, operating in the quieter and more private register he has always preferred, content to let his art exist in the world without requiring his public presence to support it. The story of Meryl Streep and Don Gummer is not a tragedy, and it resists that framing firmly. It is the story of two people who chose each other at a moment of acute grief and built something that lasted nearly half a century in an environment almost perfectly designed to prevent exactly that kind of longevity. It is the story of a marriage that survived the most sustained and relentless kind of fame, the sort that reshapes everything it touches, that raised 4 children through decades of professional demand and the invisible daily weight of real life in all its unglamorous complexity. And it is the story of two people with enough self-knowledge and mutual respect to recognize, when the moment arrived, that love is not always required to keep the same shape forever, that it can change form without disappearing entirely, that it can survive the formal end of a marriage and continue to exist quietly in shared history, in the children who carry both of them forward, in everything that 45 years of genuine commitment leaves permanently behind. Whatever comes next for each of them separately, they have already done something that most people, in any world, never quite manage. They made it last.